Day 1089 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 858,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,730 losses in the past day. Then as for hardware, 5 tanks, a whopping 84 APVs, 11 artillery, and, well, not on the list, but more Russian soldiers continuing to voice their grievances, claiming that even the wounded, including those using canes, are being sent back to the front. They assert that their command is indifferent to their conditions and simply forces them back into battle. All as the Russian MOD finds new and creative ways to keep their troop numbers up. Then headed across to the map into the Donbass front lines, where Russian telegram channels report some hefty concerns that the AFU have started using fiber optic drones on an industrial scale, with Russian footage showing a field littered with Ukrainian fiber optic wires just everywhere, like a spider web, and comes just after the fiber optic drones' usage against Russian targets. And so it's a concerning visual to see for the Russian invaders, being that these types of drones cannot be intercepted by electronic warfare countermeasures. Then more specifically on the map for this region, Ukrainian forces advanced slightly at Dechenska, which is 7 kilometers or about 4 miles south of Pokrovsk, and for an overall direction where Ukrainian forces have been putting the squeeze on Russian troops, with fierce resistance reported on the southern flank. A Russian mill blogger affiliated with the Gherkin Circle, which is a traditionally fairly well-known Russian source of brutal honesty, where he reveals the dire situation in his messages, stating that Ukrainian drones dominate the skies, making any movement nearly impossible 3 kilometers beyond Seladova. Which is pretty critical when he puts it like that, because if we pull out the ruler for the map, you'll see that 3 kilometers doesn't leave a lot of legroom. And where he goes on to state that it's preventing many Russian soldiers from, quite literally, even lifting their heads out of their trenches. Also stated was the impact that the supply lines are cut, leaving many Russian soldiers without food, water, or fuel, and that the relentless drone and artillery fire prevents any rotation of troops, while electronic warfare is exploiting gaps in their Russian defenses. And it's a laundry list of concerns, because he goes on saying conditions are brutal, with sometimes freezing temperatures and very low morale, with their soldiers desperate for air support that's not coming. And take for instance this Russian aviation-launched FAB munition, designed for air support, falling out of the sky unexploded, with increases in reports telling the tale that the AFU has developed a countering system to defeat these 250 to 1,000 kilogram payload air-launched munitions. And so looking at the history, it was about 12 to 15 months ago that the AFU realized they had a new problem on their hands, with Russia's air support expending these guided FAB munition kits at noticeably higher volumes. So how are they being countered at higher rates now? Although it's unlikely there's just one single specific weapon Ukraine utilizes to counter these airdropped threats, their overall multifaceted approach to taking out these munitions certainly includes the increased prevalence of integrated electronic warfare countermeasures, which is often cited as a key factor. This includes improved GPS and GLONASS jamming and spoofing, but beyond general GPS jamming, there's likely more specific electronic warfare systems designed to target the unique frequencies or signals used by the UMPK guidance kits themselves, which gives these FABs their targeting capabilities. It's also likely that Ukraine has been working to create a more networked and mobile signal jamming capability, enabling them to cover wider areas and react quickly to these aerial threats. So not quite the silver bullet, but nonetheless a further proficiency developed over time. Then headed across on the map to where there were some unsuccessful Russian attempts to deliver infantry to the Antonivsky Bridge that had ended up in failure on the Russian-occupied southern bank of the Kherson region. Ukrainian drone operators are awake here, And essentially, what Russia does here, and for that matter anywhere, is that in order to hold positions or take new ground, they transport a single packed APC, this one being an MTLB, drive in at high speeds up to the drop-off point, where the freshly faced new infantry quickly disembark the vehicle, followed by the APC speeding off in a hurry, preparing to do it all over again, sending more in. But only after the previous batch has expired. It's a vastly attritional approach, and sometimes taking out the vehicle itself. And an approach that belongs to the self-reinforced status quo that the Russian army has gotten themselves into, where they have to keep supplying troops to the front lines, with their strategy primarily being one based on numbers. Quality is an afterthought, naturally, with, take for instance, the walking stick or crutches army, certainly looking to become so much more than just a passing phase. Oh, and it was only 5 or 10 days ago where we saw handcuffed Russian troops inside these vehicles getting sent to the front lines, and just regular looking Russians. It just leaves you speechless sometimes, the levels to which they go to. Then headed further down the map, and as for an update on the Kerch Strait, because in a stunning display of negligence, the arbitration court of Russia's Krasnodar Krai region has slapped Volga Transneft with a fine of just 600,000 rubles, or about $6,000 for the catastrophic oil spills in the Kerch Strait last December, where the spills caused an estimated $350 million worth of damages. This paltry fine is a mere slap on the wrist, especially given how it has since emerged that the company bought a number of these oil tankers for a mere $13,000 each from ship scrapyards, and clearly cutting corners, all as a means to keep their shadow fleet of oil tankers alive. Ultimately, it means Russia is ready to roll the dice again, and with such minimal repercussions, it's no wonder they're not taking maritime safety seriously. Then headed up the map momentarily to Kursk, with more military engagements seen, including at Nikolsky, where a Russian attack including a North Korean contingent had to retreat due to incredibly high losses, with a further 50 to 100 infantry running across the fields back to where they came as part of that retreat. On the matter, Z channels blame the Russian 155th Brigade for mysteriously failing to provide support, although those North Koreans were probably never going to get much support anyway, instead getting more of that on-the-job experience for themselves. Also in Kursk, but from a different angle, as Russian soldiers returning from the battlefield expressed relief, saying they are coming out of hell. As for this example, no real moral to the story other than to say that they face a difficult adversary in Kursk that they're relieved to get away from. Then taking a look around on the map, because somewhere in the east we saw a Ukrainian Special Operations Forces ambush on a Russian assault group riding on an ATV, although very likely occurring up in Kursk. Also on the map, a Russian drone operator boasted a precise hit on a Ukrainian Armed Forces pickup truck. But in reality, what they hit was a mock-up of the vehicle. Clearly seen here is the plywood splinters from the mock-up flying everywhere, almost like confetti. Then also on the map, Ukrainian vampire drone operators delivered a strike on a Russian position in the night, hitting a Russian T-62 tank. Well, what do you know, there's still a few of them left. And also hitting an electronic warfare piece of equipment that once again failed to operate as intended. Then headed across to some news for today, as in a further follow-up to the annual Munich Security Conference event that convened global leaders in Germany to discuss pressing international security challenges. Upon commencement, US VP JD Vance took charge at the conference, critical of censorship and free speech in Europe, although did express optimism about achieving a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine. He also emphasized that military action against Russia remained a possibility if President Vladimir Putin failed to respect Ukraine's independence. He also highlighted the importance of Europe increasing its defense contributions, which was certainly something of an expected message to come from the US administration. Also for the event, Ukrainian President Zelensky called for the establishment of a European armed forces, emphasizing the need for Europe to take greater responsibility for its own defense and for supporting Ukraine. Zelensky also noted that North Korean troops fighting the AFU are learning modern warfare, perhaps some more of that on-the-job training, but also that Ukraine's army alone is not enough to fight off Russian aggression. He also noted that Europeans are beginning to understand that Russia is coming, stating of it, quote, "Something changed. Europeans used to be skeptics. Now they understand the danger." Also for the event, UK PM Keir Starmer highlighted that the world was facing a once-in-a-generation moment for security, emphasizing the need for Europe to take a greater role in NATO and act as a bridge between the US and Europe to secure Ukraine's future against Russian threats. We also heard from NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, who emphasized the necessity for Europe to prepare for potential conflicts as a preventative measure, highlighting the importance of credible deterrence and defense investment to mitigate the risk of conflict with Russia. Then to the US-Russia diplomatic front, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov during a call on February 15. The two discussed commitment to dialogue, agreeing to maintain regular communication channels, aiming to restore a mutually respectful dialogue, which is nice. Hopefully that would mean no more nuclear threats. And also discussed organising a summit between President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to be held in Saudi Arabia, as we already know, emphasizing the importance of high-level engagement to resolve bilateral and international concerns, with both parties expressing a willingness to engage in these negotiations. Though it is interesting to see, or will be interesting to see, what territorial concessions Putin will be willing to make to achieve peace, if any at all. And then in the throes of it all, French President Macron has called an emergency summit in Paris for European leaders, set for Monday, to address concerns of peace talks or negotiated settlements as it relates to Ukraine, to the exclusion of Europe, where it instead involves only the US, Russia, and Ukraine. The summit aims to rally European leaders to discuss strategies and show collective strength, which could mark a pivotal moment for European unity and assertiveness on the global stage. Surely this will include increased European defense commitments, something that the Trump administration would very much welcome, with Europe taking the primary role in defense inside of NATO and the wider European continent. And on that topic, Italian PM Meloni announced that Italy supports yesterday's proposal by President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen to remove military spending from the 3% deficit limit EU countries have. Basically, European law has limits on how much debt and deficit its member countries can have per annum, up to 3% of their GDP, but this proposal would seek to remove defense spending as being counted towards a part of that limit, enabling Europe's defense industrial base to rearm to its fullest. Then headed across to some interesting and newly innovative hardware updates that the AFU will become privy to, as most recently showcased was how a Ukrainian FPV drone can now hide underwater, similar to ground loitering drones, followed by later attacking from the underwater depths. Firstly, the quadcopter lands on water, sinks, then later launches its rotors and rises into the air again, as shown by a Ukrainian radar technology specialist. Then to some more hardware news, Germany defense contractor Rheinmetall has now reported an increase in the 155mm artillery shell production rates by another 50,000, reaching 750,000 per annum. This means that they've scaled up production to roughly 62,500 shells per month, whereas this time last year it was closer to about 35 to 40,000 shells per month. Now, Rheinmetall's former target was to reach 1.1 million shells per annum, but have now since upgraded that target to 1.4 million shells per annum. And again noting this is just for the 155mm caliber, not including the smaller shells produced also. Then headed across to another Russian economy news update. As Russia's National Wealth Fund, once a financial cushion for tough times, is on the brink of depletion. Former Russian Finance Minister Zadornov warns that if the current war spending continues, the fund's liquid assets could dry up within 6 months. As of February, it held just 3.8 trillion rubles, or about 40 billion US dollars, which is less than 2% of Russia's GDP, and it's down from 7.4%, which is where it was at before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The fund has been crucial in covering budget deficits, which have skyrocketed this year, and yet the National Wealth Fund was already on the decline before the SMO had even commenced. But as you can see here, it's been a more assertive decline ever since the full-scale invasion. Internal reports also reveal a bleak outlook, with Russia's economic ministry expecting sustained high inflation into the future, but also noting soaring corporate debt alongside what they expect to be a looming technical recession, which would normally already exist for Russia, yet it's only the massive Russian defense spending which is propping up their annual GDP figures, keeping them out of that technical recession, for now. And as for Zadornov's conclusion, end the war to restore financial stability. It's a tough pill to swallow for the Kremlin, surely, but one that Russia may need to face sooner rather than later. Let's just hope Zadornov is now doing his best to avoid high buildings or a cup of Putin's polonium tea, given this retired finance minister's call to end the war. Then headed across to a quick final funny or even a Russian military mobilization blunder segment to round it all off for today, guys, as the wives of the Russian Marines of the 155th Brigade, some of them missing in action, received a Valentine's letter note, or pamphlet, from the brigade commander, with a signature and message stating, quote, "Love is eternal, like the order not to retreat." Wow, just what they didn't want to hear last Friday the 14th. As you can see, it's getting significantly more and more difficult to finish a Russian tour of the SMO. But hey, look at all those pretty little red hearts. It's the thought that counts, right? So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks again for the support. It really helps the channel keep going. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!